Hey all, happy Monday. Welcome to the first day of our first Plan With Me challenge. I'm really excited to share with you some of the best tips that I've been learning over the last few years of running this travel company and planning more than 100 Caribbean trips for families with kids of different ages, families of different sizes, families coming from all over the US and other parts of the world, and trying to think about how to help you approach planning your next trip to the Caribbean. For this Plan With Me challenge, we're focusing a little bit on spring break 2025. And part of the reason for that is because people are planning trips, especially at peak travel times like spring breaks for families, earlier and earlier. And at Mango Tree, one of the things we really love is getting families to explore destinations through slightly smaller, more intimate boutique hotels rather than big, large resorts. And those hotels, especially because they have less rooms and less room configurations that are great for families, are the ones that are going to book up faster. So if you want to plan a unique interesting trip that's also easy and fun with your kids to the Caribbean for next spring break, you are doing the right thing by getting started early. So each video this week is going to be short and sweet and give you some of my best tips and pieces of advice for approaching your trip planning to the Caribbean. The first today to think about how to even start planning your trip. And what to think about when you want to start with a blank page and think, what is this trip going to look like for my family? Now, I think we often start with the kind of the question of like, where do I want to go? And we start making lists in our brain of, oh, I've always wanted to go to Italy or to Greece or to Costa Rica or to Barbados or whatever the place might be. And I want to encourage you to think about it a little bit differently to start. Keep those destinations in mind always, but what if you start by thinking about what kind of trip you envision? Think about what type of trip you might want at this moment in your family's journey. We've made mistakes before where we planned these extraordinarily adventurous trips with young children because we thought we wanted those types of trips, but at those moments in our lives we really needed like rest and relaxation after we hadn't slept for a year with a newborn, or whatever may have you. Whereas there are other times where we say, let's plan ahead for an adventurous trip this time. And maybe it's not going to be as restful. Maybe it will be more active with less downtime. But if we structure it in a way that strikes the right balance between activity and rest, it'll be fun. And we know that this is going to be an adventure type of travel. And that's what feels right to us right now based on our kids' ages and our, the place we are in our careers, whatever that might be. So I want to encourage you to take a few minutes and start thinking about like, what type of trip do you envision? And one of the things you should do is open up, so pause this video and open up a copy now of the travel planning spreadsheet that we sent along with them. With this video, we're not huge on like, over the top spreadsheets that give you tons of places to fill in for your trip planning, but it is nice to have a document where you can save everything that you want for your trip. When you open that spreadsheet, there's a tab for each day of the challenge this week. And this first day just gives you a place to start to think about, like, what do you want out of this trip? Is it a splurge trip? Is it a budget trip? Is it a destination I've always wanted to go to? Do you want to do lots of activities or mostly downtime? Like, what feels right to you for this particular trip? And as we talk through this PowerPoint today and this presentation of the Caribbean, start to take some notes about which destinations we're going over might align with these goals. At the bottom, you'll also have a few resources that you can access to think about which Caribbean destination might be the best for you. One is a copy of the deck that we're using for this video. The other is our free guide to traveling the Caribbean with kids of every age, which gives really specific tips about things to think about at each age in your family's journey and what might work best for kids from 0 to 2 versus teenagers and everything in between. And then the last is our most popular blog post on Mango Tree, which is the 21 best Caribbean islands with kids. Frankly, I think every Caribbean island is great with kids for the right family and for the right type of trip. It's really a matter of finding your best match. But this blog post kind of tries to explain what various islands are good for, what they really have to offer that might be unique, and why they might work for certain family configurations at certain times. So these are good resources to check in your trip planning process as well. All right, close this and go back here. Okay, so let's back to it. What kind of trip do you envision? Often I think we think of the islands as interchangeable. They're a place to go for just sand and sun, a trip to the beach, good weather, waves, but they actually have a lot of variety in their culture, in their travel time, in their setup, in their types of hotels and resorts, and in the activities that they offer. And so what I want to do is walk through a little bit an overview of some of the tropical destinations that we love best to get you thinking again about like what type of trip might be right for you and which destinations you really want to think about for your next trip. So first is thinking about overall location. It's always good to start with a map. Get a sense of where you are in the world with the destinations that you're considering. And with the Caribbean, you can see the sort of the arc that the islands take as you head east and south. So in terms of one thing that it's always kind of helpful to think about up at the beginning is like what sort of travel time and commitment are you willing to put into getting to your destination? I get a lot of clients that come to me saying we must have direct flights. And if you live somewhere like New York, that's definitely something that can be accessible to you. But there are some islands here that no matter where you're coming from, you're not going to be able to get there with direct flights unless maybe you live in Miami or Puerto Rico. But for most of the United States, you're not getting there with direct flights. That includes some destinations in the British Virgin Islands where you have to take a ferry once you arrive, or down in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which has one of my favorite destinations, but same thing. You can't fly direct. You have to fly in and take a ferry. Other destinations in the out islands of the Bahamas, you might best reach by hopper flight once you take that direct flight. And then same thing is drive time. You know, when you land in St. Lucia, many of the resorts are 45 minutes to an hour and a half away. Some of our favorite hotels in the Dominican Republic are not in Punta Cana, where a lot of people go, but are a drive to the other coast where you can get a little bit away from tourists. So as you're thinking about the type of trip that you want, you should think about, honestly, are you willing to go a little bit further to get a bit further away from it all, or to get the type of experience that sounds like the one that you want? Or is the experience that you want for this trip an easy direct flight to somewhere accessible where you only have a 15-minute drive once you land? Is that a priority? Generally speaking, anything from like the Bahamas down to Antigua and Barbuda is going to feel like can feel like a pretty short travel day. Some of the destinations to get to most quickly are in this upper half of the Caribbean, and then you start talking about a longer travel day as you get further south and further away, but then there are pockets of things that are accessible. So we can go through that as part of this conversation as well. Easy access. These destinations on the left, and you're getting a copy of this spreadsheet so you can look at it, but start to, again, take some notes. If you already thought to yourself, yes, easy access, that's what I need for this trip, then these are some of the islands you should start thinking about right away. They are the islands that have most direct flights from various cities in the United States: Mexico, Montego Bay, Jamaica, Punta Cana, Nassau in the Bahamas, as opposed to the outer islands of the Bahamas, Antigua, Grand Cayman. All of these destinations are going to have more common direct flights. Even if they're not direct from your city, it would probably be a direct flight through Miami. If you want to go one step further, either in taking an extra flight, then you can only get to St. Bart's by flying through St. Martin. Or Puerto Rico, but St. Bart's has this like glitz and glam and attraction that many people really want to visit it. So think about whether that's the kind of place you want for this trip or whether it's easy access. Some places are on this list because it's a drive once you get there. So anywhere in Jamaica, other than Montego Bay, Negril, this gem of a hotel we know on the south coast that we absolutely love, are going to be a longer drive from the airport. Same with anywhere in the Dominican Republic that's not Punta Cana. So what I consider, honestly, some of the more interesting places in those destinations that are not just the big resorts, you're going to need to travel a little bit further. Anguilla, you might have to fly to St. Martin and take a 20-minute ferry. But the journey, in my view, for the trip that you want is generally always worth it. That's sort of our motto of travel, but I also recognize that that's not for every trip. So start to think about whether this is going to be a trip where you're willing to go that little bit further with your kids to get a slightly different experience, or if you really want just the easy access. And then start to think about like what, if we go back for a moment, when you think about the islands, what type of trip are you envisioning? Are you just want sand and sun? Like you just want a beach resort, you just want to relax. Maybe you want to like stay at your hotel most of the time and take an excursion or two. What do you want beyond the beach in terms of activities? What do you want beyond the resort in terms of food and culture? So I want to talk through each of these categories for a few minutes. Again, pause and take some notes as we're brainstorming. The goal for this day is to get you thinking about some of the islands you want to go to and the trips you might want to take. And so take some notes on that spreadsheet as we talk, and then that's all you have to do today to start planning your trip, and we'll refine this further tomorrow. Sand and sun. If you want to go to the Caribbean and get that beautiful blue water, those beautiful long stretches of beach, these are some of the destinations that you want to put on your list. Turks and Caicos, you can see the picture of Grace Bay Beach. Barbados, Anguilla is known for its beaches. The Virgin Islands, Antigua as well. These are all destinations that are known for those like big, long stretches of like beautiful white sandy beach and blue water. And these are also destinations that are going to have some of like the bigger resorts as well. Because I think that when you're thinking about sand and sun in the Caribbean, there's also a couple of ways to do it. So I want to break this category down a little bit further, but these are some of the destinations that should really be on your radar if that's what you envision when you want to head to the Caribbean, because not every island is like that. So again, break it down a bit further. If you want an all-inclusive resort, you just want to get somewhere and then not think about anything else the rest of the time, stay on property, don't leave with your kids. It's a common misconception that that exists everywhere in the Caribbean. It really doesn't. That is a product of 3 specific markets, maybe 4. Mexico, Jamaica, Montego Bay, Jamaica in particular, and Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic. That is where you're going to get sort of the cheap bang for your buck, all-inclusive resorts, like the big resorts that are like, I don't say this pejoratively, but cruise ships on land, where you're going to really get that sort of like experience, are in those destinations. Antigua also has quite a few all-inclusive resorts in the sense that there are packages, but they tend to be smaller, more boutique, a bit more elevated and more expensive. So if all-inclusive pricing is really a thing that's important to you, Antigua is really another good option to look at if you don't want Jamaica, Dominican Republic, or Mexico, but that's going to come at a slightly higher price point typically than the destinations listed above. But you can go get that sand and sea without going to an all-inclusive resort, and can still be resort focused. It just might mean you're paying a la carte for food, and then maybe your hotel has 1 or 2 restaurants, or 4 or 5, but you also have access to a community beyond the hotel that it's easy to access other food and drinks and activities. That's how I really envision Turks and Caicos, Grand Cayman, and Aruba. They are resort-focused islands. The best beaches in those destinations are lined with resorts on the beach, but they actually don't have as many all-inclusives as you would think about. In Turks and Caicos, there are 2, 3 all-inclusive resorts, and then a couple dozen really wonderful small family-oriented resorts, but they're not the typical all-inclusives. Maybe you want a beach vacation, like you just really love the beach, but you're not really resort people. There are other islands that are really great for hopping around. Antigua is known for having 365 beaches, 1 for every day of the year. So you could stay at a smaller hotel in Antigua and bounce around to different beaches. Really easy to drive in that island every day. St. Martin has 37 beaches. So if you stay on the French side of St. Martin in a small boutique hotel or in a villa, there are towns that are walkable for food. You can easily rent a car and go explore different beautiful beaches every day. And then the Virgin Islands, it really, on the US side and British side, is really amazing for island hopping. You want to not just experience the beach, but be out on the water and go see different beaches on different islands, and feel a bit more exploratory. So you can think about sand and sun not just in a go sit on a resort property sort of way, but in a few different ways. So if beach is what you want, consider sort of like which of these is speaking to you. Same thing. Do you want to feel like accessible or do you want to get away from it all? So this is where you might be willing to go a little bit further to get sort of a more remote beach experience. The picture in the bottom is a private island resort in the British Virgin Islands that we went to last year to celebrate like a life milestone. Stunning beach, stunning blue waters. It's actually not that far. It's a 10-minute ferry ride from the nearest airport. But because you're in the British Virgin Islands, you have that away from it all feeling. And it's sort of a dream. Nevis in St. Kitts and Nevis is also has that one like little bit away from it all, but you fly to St. Kitts and then you have to take a boat over to Nevis. The Grenadines are great for island hopping. The Bahamas, when I think of the Bahamas, I don't think of the Atlantis in Nassau or Paradise Island. I think of all of the outer islands like the Exemas, Eleuthera, where you're getting some of the best blue water in the Caribbean and you're feeling more remote. Anguilla is the same. It's known for not having big cruise ships, so you've got fine dining, long stretches of beach as well. What do you want beyond the resort? Do you picture yourself having most of your meals at the property and you just want one or two restaurant experiences out? Do you want to pop around and experience like a beach cafe scene? So these are some islands that we really they have some of our longest restaurant guide lists when we recommend these islands to clients. The food scenes are fantastic. Some have really chill, laid back beach bar scenes like Belize. Others like Barbados and St. Martin, you get a slightly more elevated, slightly Mediterranean like chic cafe on the beach with champagne or mimosas kind of vibe. Some you get an even more broad culinary experience. Curacao has a proper like urban center that's very European, and you can experience tons of different food and then retreat back to your beach hotel at night. So if exploring local restaurants is something you're interested in, as opposed to just sort of like resort restaurants, these are some of our favorite destinations to consider. Snorkeling and scuba diving. I'm a diver. I love to snorkel. I've loved teaching my kids to snorkel. If you want a marine focus to your vacation, you really want to get underwater and do so in an accessible way that you can enjoy with your kids, these are the islands I love to recommend. They're all a little bit further off the beaten path, other than the Bahamas, than some of the other destinations we've spoken about. But while you might not have a direct flight, they all have relatively easy flight connections through Texas or Miami to get there. And they've been really some of like for that underwater snorkeling, they're really, really hard to beat. So you can see a picture of me in the clear blue beach in Bonaire up at the top with my son while my daughter sort of snorkels off behind us. Like an amazing place for snorkeling. Roatan at the bottom, you can see a picture of the reef just coming right off the shore. So that has a really lively energy in Roatan, Honduras. And you can walk right into the water from that beach and be at the reef in 10 steps. Same with Belize. It's got these are some of the islands that have some of the biggest barrier reef systems sitting right offshore that just gives you amazing access to underwater life. Maybe you really want some culture to this trip. If you want some culture, these are some of the islands that we really think have like a standout culture that's more than just like sort of your beach bar scenes. Now, I don't mean to offend any other islands. I think every island has its own unique vibe and culture, but these are some that really stand out. Jamaica, St. Kitts and Nevis. Nevis was the first British colony in the Caribbean. It's the birthplace of Alexander Hamilton. You can see stonework and history. Grenada has this really wonderful agricultural and spice production, and you can learn about the history of the island through food. In Martinique, you're basically in France. It's also one of the biggest rum producing islands in the Caribbean. And so there's a lot to learn there about rum and also the French influence. And then there are parts of Curacao where you feel like you're in the Netherlands. It really has its own vibrant energy to it as well. Maybe underwater activity isn't what you want. Maybe you are an active land based family, you love to hike, you love green, you just want lush living, you want some jungle and some rainforest in your trip. These are some of the islands that you really want to consider. They're more mountainous in their terrain. They've got rainforest, they've got zip lining, they've got hiking. You can do some real exploration in the jungle in these destinations. And then finally, because we're right at 20 minutes, which is when I wanted to stop for the day, but I hope you're getting great information out of this. These are some of our favorite blends. Grenada has always been one of my favorite destinations in the Caribbean. It has a long stretch of gorgeous beach. It has its own unique culture with its spice production. It has a rainforest interior that you can access in only 45 minutes from the beach. So you've got this really interesting mix of like a beautiful beach, really great snorkeling, access to rainforest, and it's sort of like a sleepier island in terms of tourism than some others, and that's why it has continued to remain one of my all-time favorites. Nevis, similarly, as I mentioned before, has this sort of like colonial history to it, but also has a fantastic beach where the Four Seasons sits in Nevis. And just this calm, quiet peacefulness to it. So if you want, you can go from the beach or you can hike Mount Nevis. You can also do a morning walk through a local village. It's really, really a place to relax and get that away from it all feeling with access to like just enough in terms of activities. Belize is rainforest to reef. I mean, that has the real, almost like the what people often think of in Costa Rica, but on a slightly more manageable scale, where one day you can be snorkeling off one of the biggest barrier reef systems, and then a 2 hour drive, you can spend the other half of your trip in a jungle lodge with howler monkeys and butterflies and horseback riding. Really get like an interesting mix of adventure and relaxation. And finally, Roatan. Roatan, Honduras, has been on the radar of most divers for many, many years, but I think is really an emerging family destination. An amazing beach that's really casual with tons of beach bars and restaurants. So, and very calm waters. So, really great for kids. And then, as I mentioned before, the snorkeling is right off the reef. It's also a long, skinny island and has a narrow jungle interior. And so you can mix up your beach days with going into the interior. And if you have little kids, it's got sloths and monkeys and parrots. If you have older kids, there's zip lining, ATVs, horseback riding on the beach, lots of activities, and then snorkeling and diving like galore. So these destinations all have access to some really good snorkeling and marine life, some really interesting land-based activities, and some nice cool boutique hotels as well. So I sort of like highlight those as like if you're looking for a little bit of a mix of everything, they're really great destinations to consider. So I hope that this has been helpful in that you've paused it and gone back and thought about which type of destination you might want in the Caribbean for this trip. And then what we're going to do tomorrow is take your list of islands that have really jumped out and appealed to you, and we're going to start tackling flight research and think about how to narrow your choices based on where you can get and how to use Google Flights to do that. So have a great day, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.